Researchers in Turkey are about to embark on an excavation at the ancient site of Karahan Tepe, and they believe it's much older than Göbekli Tepe, the famous zero point of world history. If you were to ask any professor of history or even a self-respecting armchair archaeologist to name the oldest monument ever discovered, they would have all said Göbekli Tepe. But now, that answer might be Karahan Tepe, and this is creating a lot of excitement in archaeological circles. Karahan Tepe is said to be much older than Göbekli Tepe. Archaeologists have been working at the Karahan Tepe site, which is often called the sister site of Göbekli Tepe, since 1997. The site is located near Yagmulu and roughly 35 kilometers east of the 12,000-year-old Göbekli Tepe site. Over the years, archaeologists have made a series of amazing discoveries at the Karahan Tepe site. In particular, tons of buried T-shaped obelisks, similar to the ones carved with wild animals at Göbekli Tepe, have led researchers to conclude that Karahan Tepe is much older than its younger sister, Göbekli Tepe. Head of excavations at Karahan Tepe, Dr. Nesmi Karul, said that 12 spots estimated to be in the same period as Göbekli Tepe are now known in the region, one of which is the Karahan Tepe. Speaking at the 10th International Resort Tourism Congress, Culture and Tourism Minister Mehmet Nuri Esroy said that an intensive and rapid excavation program continues in Karahan Tepe, which to date has yielded 250 obelisks featuring animal figures. Esroy claims that planned excavations will prove the settlement at Karahan Tepe will be much older than the 12,000-year-old Göbekli Tepe. A 2016 National Geographic article recounted the fascinating story of the discovery and preservation of Göbekli Tepe. Professor Klaus Schmidt, a German archaeologist who led excavations at the site, argued before he died in 2014 that a vast labor force needed to build the enclosures, and that this construction project pushed people to develop agriculture as a way of providing predictable food and perhaps drink for workers. At the 2015 World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, Turkey's Dogus Group announced that they plan to spend $15 million over the next 20 years in partnership with the National Geographic Society on the Göbekli Tepe site. And Dogus Group chairman Ferit İhsanek said in a press release that the reason so much cash was being spent on Göbekli Tepe was because this prehistoric temple was the zero point in time. Karahan Tepe may well be Göbekli Tepe's older sister. While Göbekli Tepe holds the world record in media headlines and elsewhere as the earliest temple of its type ever discovered, there are several other contenders for this crown in Turkey. According to Jens Nottroff, an archaeologist at the German Archaeological Institute who is working on Göbekli Tepe site, smaller versions of the pillars, symbols and architecture carved into stone at Göbekli Tepe have been found in settlements up to 125 miles away, including Karahan Tepe. Professor Nottroff told National Geographic that Göbekli Tepe probably served the region as a cathedral, and therefore the surrounding sacred sites were like parish churches. The scientist also thinks hunter-gatherers traveled long distances to meet, worship, and help build new monumental structures through vast community projects that included grand feasts to display wealth. Returning to Karahan Tepe, according to a report in Daily Sabah, many more years of excavations and research must be conducted to determine what exactly it was used for. However, while it does happen, scientists seldom make big claims without equally big proof, and in this instance, the researchers think that when they ultimately get to Karahan Tepe's excavation center, it will be much older than 12,000 years. The archaeologists at Karahan Tepe are also convinced that they have a new zero point in world history. The mayor says the site will become a priority in place of Göbekli Tepe, and it will become a new focus of national archaeological and tourist attention. Karahan Tepe is the sister to the enigmatic Göbekli Tepe that sits around 23 miles southeast of Göbekli upon an elevated limestone ridge. It has many striking similarities to Göbekli. Firstly, it consists of T-shaped pillars, 266 of them that mostly form parallel rows. The pillars have relief carvings, and the site appears, like Göbekli, to be deliberately buried under a great artificial mound, although this could be natural, as after 10,500 years of accumulation of dirt, combined with high winds, could have covered it back up. The comparisons do not end there. It also has serpent relief carvings, strange rock indentations, large cut marks, porthole stones, and an unfinished T-shaped pillar still in the quarry, the focus of this article. Karahan Tepe was first discovered in 1997 and was surveyed in 2000 and again in 2011. Like Göbekli Tepe, it's located within the boundaries of Sanliurfa, ancient Edessa, the birthplace of Abraham, around 30 miles from the city. It's not an officially recognized tourist site, so they had to plan their trip carefully as it was on private land upon the Tek Mountains. Fortunately, a well-placed, probably modern standing stone marked the entrance to the track that led to the farm that is located behind. When Andrew Collins visited there in 2004, the person who showed him around was warned he would get a beating if they found anyone had visited there. 10 years later, and the owners welcomed the occasional visitor with tea and information. No beatings entailed, just sweet hot beverages and conversation after the morning visit. The dating of the site is impressive, as it's dated to 8,500 BC, contemporary with the now submerged Navali Quarry and the later stages of Göbekli Tepe. There are obvious similarities to these and other sites in the vicinity, but we've heard that there was a quarry on site where an unfinished T-shaped pillar still sits within the bedrock. Kevin Fish diligently searched for it with only one clue, that it was directly to the west of the main enclosure, as mentioned in the 2011 report. Kevin eventually converged at the impressive monolith. It lies on a rock face sloping 30 degrees towards the setting sun. At 18 feet long, it would have probably been the largest monolith at the site. The site is not excavated yet, so this can't be confirmed, and weighs in at around 30 to 40 tons. Its downward angle on the slope on natural exposed rock face may have been why this was a preferred spot to quarry from. As archaeologist Bahattin Selik explains, this is quite a practical technique, with roughly chiseling on the side of the rock to produce a T-shape, whilst carving the other side 40 centimeters wide and 1 meter deep. The solid pillar separated from the bedrock with this technique and can easily be removed from the quarry with the help of a slope. Andrew Collins decided to measure it and discovered it was indeed 18 feet, 5.5 meters in length, with a maximum width of 6.6 feet, 2 meters, across its T-shaped head. This is similar in size to the twin monoliths at the center of Göbekli's enclosure, C and D. The weathering was very bad, much like the exposed parts of the pillars on the main hill. However, what lies underneath could be as well preserved as Göbekli Tepe. Altogether, Karahan Tepe is a fascinating site that begs excavation, as the significance of the nearby Göbekli Tepe has now hit the headlines. After leaving the site, the visitor wondered if the location of the choice of rock was significant. Was the direction of the quarry from the main temple an indication of a tradition that existed as far back as 10,500 years ago? Andrew Collins discussed the possibility that, indeed, it could be the case, as bringing quarried stone from the west to the east may represent bringing it into the light, sunrise, from darkness, the sunset. However, the remaining 14-foot pillar still on the eastern slope had further avenues slightly further east of it, so again it showed a possible west to east movement. Alternatively, it could also represent an east to west direction from the smaller quarry to the main enclosure. After searching through some Masonic texts, a reference was found to a ceremony where the initiate had to move in that direction, east to west. Why this is, perhaps, could represent facing one's own death, as initiation rites such as these are often about facing deep-rooted fears. Whether this was on the minds of the builders of Karahan Tepe, we'll never know, unless, of course, the site gets excavated and evidence emerges. From now, we can only speculate. Another aspect that grabbed Andrew's attention was the fact that the parallel rows appeared to be serpent-like, weaving up or down the main hill or from the main enclosure. In his initial report, Andrew stated, "It's even possible that these zigzagging pairs of stones making up the stone avenues located on the northern, eastern sides of the tepe signify the path of snakes, which are seen to descend like living energy into the valley below." This idea is given credence through the fact that carving on the stone seems directed up the hill, as if the direction of movement is downwards through the various sets of gateways. After coming to this conclusion, Andrew dreamt of snakes, their tails tied together, each one trying to break free of its bondage, all of them writhing about in the process. With this dream came the impression that the snakes represented the containment, flow, and energy of the stone's avenues at Karahan Tepe. An interesting concept if nothing else. Earth energy springs to mind, as it has been found in Avebury, Brittany and Cornwall that stone avenues mark the path of telluric earth energy currents, with a crossing point often at the center of the complex, which would naturally congregate on a hilltop. More research needs to be carried out to confirm this hypothesis, but with the serpent symbolism at such a remote site, it could even reveal the origins of geomancy and earth energy science. When they go back in September, they will have some equipment to take readings and dowsing rods to find out if this is the case. Archaeologists are preparing to launch the third major excavation of an important site on the Jiroft Plain in the Halil River of southeastern Iran. The Konar sandal remains were exposed after flooding in 2001 near Jiroft in Iran. Sheltering by towering, rugged mountains on three sides, this hidden jewel was revealed to be a sprawling Bronze Age urban settlement built by a magnificent kingdom whose existence had been previously excluded from the annals of history. The discovery led some experts to hypothesize that the long-lost Jiroft culture was actually the cradle of civilization before the emergence of Sumer or Mesopotamia. The excavated area in Iran's Kerman province has been named Konar Sandal. Its central feature is a pair of massive burial mounds separated by a distance of approximately 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, which have been designated as Konar Sandal A, north, and Konar Sandal B, south. The site is located near Jiroft in southeastern Iran. Beneath Mound A, archaeologists found a stone structure they believed was used for religious purposes. Under Mound B, they found the remains of a 2-story fortified citadel anchored to a base that covered more than 33 acres, 13.5 hectares. At the foot of the mounds, deeper digs have revealed the presence of many smaller buildings, and it's believed that similar structures will eventually be unearthed in the space between the two mounds and elsewhere in the subterranean surrounding environment. In addition to the excavated structures, Konar Sandal has also yielded a plenitude of stunningly attractive and finely crafted artifacts, revealing the existence of a culturally sophisticated people who created and resided in an indisputably advanced society. Unlike the first two explorations, which were carried out by international teams, this new excavation will be strictly an Iranian affair, sponsored by the country's Research Institute of Cultural Heritage and Tourism. The demarcation project is aimed to determine the legal boundaries of the prehistorical site, explained the Kerman provincial tourism chief, who referred to the Konar Sandal site as one of the most important Bronze Age cities in Southwest Asia. This is a strong contention, but in fact this assessment may be unduly modest. The first section of the Jiroft Plain site and necropolis was discovered in 2001. Heavy flooding of the Halil River washed away tons of topsoil that had previously covered it, exposing a complex of ancient tombs no one had ever expected to find. Impressive hauls of Bronze Age jewelry, ceramics, tools, drinking cups, board games, and a variety of decorative items inlaid with semi-precious stones were recovered from the unearthed cemetery. Unfortunately, the initial discoverers were looters and antiquities black marketers who stole and sold many valuable artifacts before law enforcement and the military finally arrived to secure the site. After this initial discovery, the first official excavation at Jiroft began in 2003 under the leadership of the Iranian archaeologist Dr. Youssef Majidazeh. It ended in 2007, and he published his team's findings shortly thereafter. Based on radiocarbon dating, the archaeologists concluded that the Jiroft civilization that built the integrated urban complex had reached the peak of its power and prosperity at around the year 2500 BC. However, signs indicated that initial construction on the complex may have begun as long ago as the 5th millennium BC. During this excavation, and during another that was launched in 2014, archaeologists continued to find many valuable and intriguing artifacts inside the mounds and beneath the surrounding landscape. Most notably, they also found 4 tablets inscribed in 2 different languages, one of which was composed entirely of geometrical figures and could not be compared to anything that had been found before. So, just how significant was the discovery of this long-lost, literate kingdom in a bleak, desolate area of Iranian desert? Significant enough to throw the identification of Mesopotamia as the cradle of civilization into question. Jean Perrault, a French archaeologist with previous excavation experience in Iran, was invited to inspect the site and its contents during the earliest stages of the first excavation. When asked to share his impressions, he stated the following: "An area we formerly regarded as resided only by nomads and their cattle was the heart of an incredibly advanced civilization. In this area, people lived with a social hierarchy. These people had an explicit view of the world, which distinguishes them from the Sumerians. Henceforth, we must consider Jiroft as the origin of civilizations and refer to all other civilizations as pre- or post-Jiroft civilization." There may be a bit of hype in this statement, since Sumerian civilization can be traced back at least as far, if not farther, than the Jiroft civilization to the 5th and 6th millenniums BC. But given that Mesopotamia and southern Iran are separated by only 600 miles, 1,000 kilometers, there exists the possibility that the Jiroft civilization shared a common ancestor with the Sumerians, and that perhaps the two split following the chaos, confusion, and destruction caused by the great floods that occurred at the end of the last ice age. At the very least, it's reasonable to assume that the peoples of Mesopotamia would have interacted with their Jiroftian neighbors to the east, perhaps to a significant enough extent that each culture was influencing the development of the other. In fact, many of the artifacts discovered at Konar Sandal are decorated with mythological imagery that seems to link its culture with that of Mesopotamia. The Jiroft civilization specialized in the creation of pottery using a semi-precious mineral known as chlorite, and examples of this pottery containing strikingly similar iconography have been found at various archaeological sites throughout the Middle East and Asia, including sites identified with Bronze Age Mesopotamia. Different interpretations of the exact identity of the lost Jiroft civilizations have been offered. Dr. Majid Zida believes that he and his colleagues may have discovered the site of the legendary land of Aratta, a glorious Atlantis-like kingdom from the Bronze Age that mysteriously disappeared from the pages of history in the far distant past. However, knowledge of Aratta comes primarily from Sumerian poems, which has led some to question whether such a place ever existed at all. An alternative theory suggests that the newly discovered Iranian civilization may be the ancient kingdom of Mahashi, which was located in southern Iran and is known to have been involved in conflicts with the Mesopotamian kingdom of Akkad in the 3rd millennium BC. A final answer to the riddle of the giraffe civilization may never be found, but the fact that it existed at all is forcing archaeologists and historians to reassess everything they thought they knew about the primacy and importance of Mesopotamia to world history. Mesopotamia has not been diminished, but going forward it may have to share the title Cradle of Civilization with its cousin from the east. Scientists have uncovered decorated artifacts dating from between 40,000 and 75,000 years ago from Tanzania and the southern tip of South Africa that show that man developed the capacity for symbolic thought long before previously believed. The discovery of these artifacts could present huge problems to conventional thinking about human history. The earliest kind of decoration used by humans was probably ochre, which we know was used over 200,000 years ago in the Middle Stone Age and Middle Paleolithic. The earliest evidence of its use in Africa dates back 285,000 years. Ochre is an umbrella term for a range of earthy, iron-rich rocks composed of iron oxides or oxyhydroxides such as shales, sandstones, mudstones, and specularite. In Africa, ochre is still used for protection from the sun and against insects such as mosquitoes. It has also been scientifically proven to inhibit the effect of UV radiation and also has many other uses. Fascinatingly, ochre appears in the archaeological record around the same time as anatomically modern humans and became more frequently used from about 100,000 years ago at many Middle Stone Age sites. One of the most often debated questions in the study of early man is, when did the origins of modern human behavior begin? When and where did our common ancestors first begin to behave in ways similar to ourselves? Although it is well known that Homo sapiens were anatomically modern by 200,000 years ago in Africa, there's never been evidence to support the idea that these humans could be capable of modern behavior. But all that changed with the discovery of the Blombos heads on the 24th of April 2004 by a team of scientists led by Dr. Christopher Henshelwood, a South African archaeologist affiliated with the University of Bergen in Norway and the State University of New York at Stony Brook. The discovery was made at Blombos Cave on the shore of the Indian Ocean 200 miles east of Cape Town. Archaeologists now believe that due to these and other findings, most ancient symbolic traditions in Africa date back at least 100,000 years. Years after these amazing discoveries, new discoveries relating to early Homo sapiens' cognitive abilities are still challenging mainstream views. The archaeological site at Blombos Cave contains Middle Stone Age archaeological deposits, including hearths, bone, stone, marine shells and sand in discrete layers dated to between 100,000 and 72,000 years ago. This is seen by many researchers as probably the most important period in the early development of modern human behavior. Published results from Blombos Cave indicate that some aspects of modern behavior evolved during the early-late Pleistocene after 100,000 years ago in Africa. Excavations at the cave match recent and older findings from a number of African Middle Stone Age sites that date to this time period. The discoveries at the cave show that people apparently had the intention to make a statement about themselves with jewelry about 30,000 years earlier than any previously identified personal ornaments used by our human ancestors. This was the conclusion of the archaeologists who discovered a collection of tiny shells pierced with holes, as if they had been prepared for stringing as primitive beads. The 41 pea-sized shell beads were uncovered in groups arranged by sizes and shade, each cluster probably representing a single piece of jewelry. According to researchers, the strings of bead represent the oldest, well-dated examples of people making and wearing jewelry. This can be interpreted as further evidence that these people possessed a language capable of sharing the symbolic meanings of these objects. 2 years before the discovery of the beads, Dr. Henselwood reported the discovery of other evidence of possibly complex symbolic thinking by the inhabitants of Blombos Cave, including abstract engravings and finely worked bone tools and weapon points. The shell beads of Blombos Cave were from a small snail-like mollusk, which must have been brought by the group from rivers more than 10 miles away. All the recovered shells from Blombos Cave were carefully pierced around 75,000 years ago using a bone tool to create a keyhole perforation. These were then strung and worn as a personal ornament. Archaeologists discovered signs of repeated rubbing on the beads, a sign that they had been rubbed against one another and against the cord, resulting in discrete use-wear surfaces on each bead. Such patterns of wear are not present on the shells in their natural environment. Microscopic residues of ochre discovered inside some of the beads probably resulted from deliberate coloring by the wearer or perhaps by transfer when worn. Henselwood and other researchers believe that this small but growing record of very early artistic artifacts from Africa are vital evidence that modern behavioral traits, such as the use of external symbols, developed slowly over a couple of 100,000 years, not abruptly after our ancestors emerged from Africa, as some archaeologists have suggested. However, not all researchers agreed with Dr. Henselwood's interpretation that these mysterious artifacts were expressions of a modern type of creativity. Indeed, a few of them have even questioned whether the shells were actually used as beads. Archaeologist Randall White of New York University, for example, does not believe that humans made the holes in the snail shells, saying, "I'm disturbed by the fact that there are no tool traces." Up until the discoveries in Blombos Cave, the earliest African personal ornaments were 13 ostrich eggshell beads from Kenya, dated to 40 to 45,000 years ago. Other, slightly more recent evidence includes a 43,000-year-old perforated teeth from Bulgaria and 41,000-year-old marine beads from Turkey. In 2000, archaeologists reported finding ostrich eggshell beads as well as ochre pencils and fish bones at a site in the Serengeti National Park of Tanzania. The archaeologists were not able to date the two carved donut-shaped pieces of ostrich shell precisely, but they came from the same layer as tools from the African Middle Stone Age between 280,000 and 45,000 years ago. For some reason, the mysterious discovery was not announced until 4 years later, in March 2004, at the Paleoanthropology Society meeting in Montreal. Despite the uncertainty over their exact age, one of the archaeologists who discovered the beads, Curtis Marian, from the Institute of Human Origins and Department of Anthropology at Arizona State University, stated that they were unambiguous examples of symbolic behavior. But why do decorated beads mean that we may have discovered the earliest examples of modern human thinking? Research has shown that symbols cannot exist in isolation, but generally form a part of interlinked systems. Modern human behavior is usually defined as behavior that is caused by socially constructed patterns of symbolic thinking, actions, and communication. The capacity for symbolic thought is not the main defining factor for modern human behavior, but rather it is the use of symbolism to organize behavior that defines us. So, early humans were first behaviorally modern when symbols became an inherent part of their daily lives. In basic terms, this means that people were using the artifacts that they made to organize their social world in a similar way as we do today. Within each group of people, such as those at the Blombos Caves, artifacts may have had meanings that could be understood only by members of that group. A good example is the design of the bead necklace discovered in the cave, which may have carried a significant meaning that was not understood by people outside the group. The findings from Blombos Cave and from Tanzania, and the subsequent reanalysis and excavation of other relevant sites have resulted in a clear change in our understanding of the timing and location of the development of modern human behavior. Archaeologists believe that these discoveries undoubtedly reflect the acquisition of completely modern cognitive abilities by southern African populations at least 100,000 years ago. Although scientists are aware that these are vastly important discoveries in terms of early man, they still seem to be a little reluctant to believe very early dates. Randall White commented, "If the dates hold up, we now seem to be seeing a trail of representational objects that is increasingly older as we move back from Europe into Africa." A mysterious small clay figurine of a human found in 1889 at Nampa, Idaho, has remained a controversial artifact since its discovery. As the figurine was found at a depth of 300 feet in a geological stratum that dates to around 2 million years ago, some researchers believe the culture that created it must have flourished at the same period. But according to conventional chronology, this is simply not possible. In 1887, 5 gentlemen, James A. Pinney, Nathan Falk, Joseph Perrault, John Bernard, and M.A. Kurtz, formed a company to locate artesian water at the new town of Nampa, southwest Idaho. By July of 1889, their sand pump had reached a depth of over 300 feet. According to Mr. Kurtz, he was at the sand pump checking the contents coming out when, in his own words, he had the clay image in his hand and supposed it was a twig. "I dipped it into a barrel of water standing near, washed it off and saw at once what it was. The tiny baked clay artifact was about 1.5 inches long in the shape of a human." American amateur geologist George Frederick Wright later wrote about the discovery in his book, The Origin and Antiquity of Man. The record of the well shows that they had penetrated first about 50 feet of soil, then about 15 feet of basalt, and afterwards passed through alternate beds of clay and quicksand, down to the depth of about 300 feet when the sand pump began to bring up numerous clay balls, some of them more than 2 inches in diameter, densely coated with iron oxide. 2 million years old. Wright went on to describe the mysterious figurine. It was a female figure and had the lifelike lineaments in the parts which were finished that would do credit to the classic centers of art. American archaeologists at the time noticed that the apparent similarities between the Nampa figurine and those of Upper Paleolithic Europe. But how had the figure ended up in a geological formation from the Pliocene-Pleistocene transition dating to approximately 2 million years ago? The oldest known example of a depiction of a human being is the Venus of Hohlfels from a cave in the Swabian Alps of Germany, which is dated to between 40,000 and 35,000 years ago. Does the incredibly ancient Nampa figurine challenge the evolutionary scenario, as some independent researchers have suggested? What mysterious culture existed in North America 2 million years ago who could have been sophisticated enough to craft such an object? Perhaps the figure shows that intelligent humans might have existed on Earth far earlier than originally believed by science. The Nampa figurine has been held up by some as a perfect example of an out-of-place artifact, objects found in contexts that are way out of sync with the accepted chronology of human history. For some researchers, such artifacts place a huge question mark against what we think we know of the world and its history. Some argue that these discoveries offer persuasive evidence that in remote antiquity mankind was significantly more advanced than we could ever imagine. They insist that at various times in prehistory we have reached a high level of civilization only for it to be subsequently destroyed without a trace by natural or man-made catastrophes. Two well-known examples of such out-of-place artifacts are the supposed fossilized human footprints discovered in the 1880s at the summit of Big Hill in the Cumberland Mountains in Jackson County, Kentucky, and an apparently man-made object enclosed in rock known as the Costco artifact, which to all intents and purposes resembles a modern spark plug. The Kozo artifact was initially believed by some to be more than 500,000 years old and belong to an unknown, impossibly old civilization. However, later research into the object concluded something entirely different. Two researchers believing the object to be relatively modern enlisted the help of the Spark Plug Collectors of America. They sent letters and copies of the X-rays of the artifact to 4 different spark plug collectors, who had no knowledge of the case and had never seen the pictures before. The collectors independently came to the same conclusion. They were certain that it was a 1920s-era Champion spark plug, one that probably powered a Ford Model T, and had been modified possibly to serve the mining operations in the Coso mountain range. The amount of decay in the artifact was an almost perfect match for the rates of decay that would occur in a spark plug from this era. So the Coso artifact had been lying on the mountain for no more than 40 years, and had not been encased in rock at all, but in a material composed mainly of hardened clay with a mixture of organic matter. Understandably, members of the scientific community do not support the extreme date for the Nampa figurine. For example, Michael Brass, in his 2002 book, The Antiquity of Man, Artifactual, Fossil and Gene Records Explored, notes that such a small fragile clay figurine would have undoubtedly been destroyed by the drilling equipment upon retrieval as it was brought up to the surface. Other researchers have pointed out that there are a number of ways by which the figurine could have worked its way into the Pliocene-Pleistocene clay, through fissures, through mining activity, or even by being pushed there by the drill. The presence of the clay balls found at the same general depth, close to the solid bedrock. This might suggest that a variety of materials had descended fairly rapidly through the deposit by a mechanism currently unknown. The reliability of the work of George Frederick Wright, which is so critical for those who believe that the figurine is really 2 million years old, has also been called into question and revealed to be highly suspect. Wright's contemporaries were highly critical of his writing and did not take his work seriously as science. D.J. Brinton wrote a book review of Wright's Man and the Glacial Period in the journal Science in 1892. In this review, he states, Dr. Wright's last example is the feeblest of all the Nampa image, a beautifully formed clay image of a female said to have been brought up from a depth of 300 feet in the holing of an artesian well at Nampo, Idaho. It is sad to destroy illusions, but when this same image with its story was laid before a well-known government geologist, and he at once recognized it's a clay toy manufactured by the neighboring Pocatello Indians, the person displaying it replied with engaging frankness, "Well, now, don't give me away." As if that were not enough, the well-known government geologist was in fact J.W. Powell, who wrote in Popular Science Monthly in 1893, "In the fall of 1889, the writer visited Boise City in Idaho. While stopping at a hotel, some gentlemen called on him to show him a figurine which they said had been found in sinking an artesian well in the neighborhood at a depth of more than 300 feet. It was claimed that this figurine had been brought up from the bottom of an artesian well while the men were working. When this story was told, the writer, Powell, he simply jested with those who claimed to have found it. He had known the Indians that live in the neighborhood had seen their children play with such figurines, and had no doubt that the little image had lately belonged to some Indian children, and said the same. While stopping at the hotel, different persons spoke about it, and it was always passed off as a jest, and various comments were made about it by various people, some of them claiming it had given them much sport. When Powell later read George Frederick Wright's book, he was extremely surprised to discover that Wright had obtained the Nampa figurine and that he had actually published it as evidence of the great antiquity of man in the valley of Snake River. A certain Mr. McGee also attacked the honesty of the supposed discoverers of the ancient artifact, Kurtz and Doofs. In the 1894 second edition of Man and the Glacial Period, George Frederick Wright repeats McGee's assertions. It is a fact, says McGee, that one of the best-known geologists of the world chanced to visit Nampa while the boring was in progress, and the figurine and the pretty fiction were laid before him. He recognized the figurine as a toy such as the neighboring Indians give their children and laughed at the story, whereupon the owner of the object enjoined secrecy, pleading, "Don't give me away. I fooled a lot of fellows already, and I'd like to fool some more." What does the Nampa figurine represent? In the years since its discovery, a lot of research has been done into the culture of the Native Americans local to the area where the figure was found. These studies have found, as J.W. Powell stated 120 years ago, that small, Fragile clay figurines like the ones discovered were common to these Native American tribes in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The evidence overwhelmingly points to the Nampa figurine being a hoax, perpetrated at a time when such stunts were popular and people enjoyed their brief notoriety. A drawing recently discovered on the wall of a cave in the west of France appears to be the oldest known portrait of a human face. The portrait was drawn with calcium carbonate and used the bumps in the wall to give form to the face. The cave drawing was found alongside a human body and represents the only second time in history that a human body from the Upper Paleolithic period had been found placed in a cave with decorations. It's unclear if the portrait has any connection with the mysterious Venus figurines, small statuettes of female figures found throughout Europe and some parts of Asia, some of which date back 40,000 years. In 2006, it was announced that archaeologists had discovered the earliest known depiction of a human face in the Villeneuve cave system near Bordeaux in western France. The image, which had originally been discovered by a local pensioner, Gérard Jody, was only made public after 6 months of scientific testing and examination by French scientists and archaeologists that dated the drawings to 27,000 years ago, which makes the Villeneuve Grotto one of the oldest sites of rock art in the world. The face is drawn with black calcium carbonate on an already face-shaped rocky mass. 2 pieces of calcite that split are used to form the hair, with 2 black horizontal strokes depicting the eyes. A vertical stroke forms the nose and another horizontal stroke the mouth. The cave also featured other wall decorations, including a negative imprint of a right hand surrounded in black on a wall made by blowing color onto the area once the hand had been placed there, according to experts. Also found inside the same cave was a skeleton of a young man placed on the ground. 2 rib bones from the skeleton were analyzed at a laboratory in Miami, Florida, and dated the skeleton to 27,000 years ago. 5 skeletons of young hyenas were found in nearby parts of the cave system. Just a few months after the world found out about the Villeneuve Grotto find, controversy arose about the claim that it was the oldest representation of a human face. Australian rock art experts questioned the claim, pointing to the wealth of engravings and paintings of man made by early Aborigines. Professor Mike Morwood of the University of New England said, "Some of the earliest rock painting traditions in the Palbara, the Kimberley, and Arnhem Land date back over 30,000 years ago and include depictions of human figures as well as animals. So while the Villeneuve cave painting is a very significant finding and may be the oldest portrait known in Western Europe, it certainly is not the oldest such artwork in the world." Archaeologist Josephine MacDonald of the University of Western Australia is the author of an academic work entitled Archaic Faces to Headdresses: The Changing Role of Rock Art Across the Arid Zone. She was in agreement with Professor Morwood's opinion that faces in Australian rock art appear to predate the recent French discovery. Certainly, there's some rock art in Australia that is at least 30,000 years old, and it indicates the depiction of faces. Most Australian archaeologists agree the earliest art in Australia was produced before the last ice age, which gives it a significant age. There are some researchers, however, who believe that both the Villeneuve Grotto portrait and the earliest Australian Aboriginal portrait art are predated by small statuettes known as Venus figurines. Venus figurines are a class of distinctive artifacts dating back to the Upper Paleolithic period, roughly between 40,000 and 10,000 years ago. Early 20th century prehistorians, believing that the figurines depicted an ancient model of beauty, named the objects Venus figurines, in references to the Roman goddess of beauty. The figurines were fashioned mainly in the form of stylized representations of females with large breasts and buttocks, and are found over a vast area of Europe and parts of Western Asia. The most famous of these Venus figurines, and until the discovery of the Villeneuve Grotto portrait, is the Venus of Willendorf, found near the town of Willendorf, Austria. The most notable and common type of Venus figurines are small three-dimensional sculptures of voluptuous women, ranging in height from 1.2 inches to more than 15 inches, and carved from a wide range of materials, including serpentine, schist, limestone, steatite, fired clay, ivory, bone, and antler. There are also carved plaques showing similar representations and figurines that apparently show young females. The sizes and proportions of the Venus figurines vary, though the majority follow certain artistic conventions: large breasts and stomach, wide hips and swollen thighs, all probably intended to depict pregnancy. Facial features are usually absent, as are arms, hands and feet, and the heads are relatively small. A few examples have what appears to be braided hair, such as the Venus of Bras-as-Puy and the Venus of Willendorf, and others have been discovered with traces of red ochre on them. Venus figurines were manufactured over a vast period of time, from around 40,000 years ago and up to around 13,000 years ago. The figurines have been discovered from the French Pyrenees to the Siberian plains, mostly from cave and rock shelter sites. Recently, however, a remarkable carved ivory Venus figurine was discovered in Hohlfels cave in southwestern Germany, which is thought to be the oldest sculpture of a human figure ever found. In fact, it is the oldest undisputed example of Upper Paleolithic art and figurative prehistoric art in general. The 2.4 inches tall figurines date to between 35,000 and 40,000 years ago, belonging to the early Aurignacian, at the very beginning of the Upper Paleolithic, which is associated with the assumed earliest presence of Homo sapiens in Europe. The sculpture was fashioned without a head, like some other examples of Venus figurines, but it does have a carved ring where the head should be, suggesting that it was worn as a pendant. In the opinion of Professor Conard, the various incised lines and markings that cover much of the surface of the figure may represent clothing. Excavations at the site by Nicholas J. Conard from a university in Germany also discovered other figurines, including a horse's head, a water bird, and a half-human, half-lion figurine, all dated to about 30,000 to 33,000 years ago. Also found at this remarkable site were worked flint, bone and ivory, bones of horses, reindeer, cave bear, mammoth and ibex, as well as a deliberately burned bone. A puzzling artifact, though, is a bird bone flute with 5 finger holes. It was also unearthed in this incredible cave, dating to about 35,000 years ago, which would have made it the oldest handcrafted musical instrument ever discovered. However, subsequent examination of the artifact has persuaded scientists that it is in fact the earliest known instrument for making rope. One intriguing possibility which has been put forward is that the Neanderthals, rather than anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, crafted the artifacts at the Hohlfels site. However, although Neanderthals were still living in Europe about 30,000 to 35,000 years ago and are known to have frequented the Hohlfels cave, the archaeological layers in which the Venus figurine and other carvings were found is characteristic of modern humans rather than Neanderthals. A wide variety of interpretations regarding what Venus figurines were meant to represent exist. These explanations range from children's educational material to representations of fertility goddesses. The extreme accumulation of fat around the buttocks depicted on many of the figurines has led some researchers, such as French archaeologist Edouard Piet, to suggest that the figurines are actual physical representations of members of the Ice Age hunting tribes who made them. However, the fact that many Venus figurines depict females who do not possess such a feature would suggest that this theory is at best unproven. A few decades ago, the most popular theory to explain these strange figurines was that they were representations of a worldwide mother goddess cult. The belief, put forward by archaeologist Marija Gimbutas, among others, that Stone Age people worship the Earth Mother as a universal deity, has been largely discredited now, though it still has some adherents. In Paleolithic, pre-agricultural hunter-gatherer societies who lived in harsh Ice Age environments where the population did not have quick or easy access to a food supply, the Venus figurines may have suggested a desire for abundancy and security. Though not all examples were rotund or had exaggerated feminine features. The fact that Venus figurines are found over such a wide geographical area indicates that there was a shared understanding among the Paleolithic hunter-gatherer tribes of Europe and Western Asia of a particular aspect of womanhood or a certain type of woman. However, like the vast majority of examples of prehistoric art, we can only guess at the cultural meaning and significance of the Venus figurines to our remote Ice Age ancestors. The remains of an ancient domesticated dog that spent its life with humans has been unearthed in an Italian cave. Believe it or not, this ancient domesticated dog is now considered to be Europe's earliest pet dog and might be 20,000 years old. How wolves became wolf-like and then are early friends. The early ancestors of grey wolves, Canis lupus, were a group of carnivores named the creodonts that roamed the northern hemisphere between 100 and 120 million years ago. About 55 million years ago, this ancient species gave rise to the carnassials, a group of wolf-like animals that had specialized jaws and razor-sharp teeth for tearing and eating meat. One member of this family, Miakis, is thought to be the common ancestor of all present-day wolves, bears, raccoons, weasels, and dogs. Researchers hope this incredible discovery in Italy will provide new information on how and when dogs diverged from wolves and became domesticated human pets. Dr. Francesco Boschkin heads the team of archaeologists from the University of Siena in Italy that published the study on the Italian canid and wolf remains found in the caves. According to an article in Scientific Reports, he stated it might be the oldest ever remains of a domesticated pet dog found in Europe. The animal remains are expected to be somewhere between 14 and 20,000 years old. This was the time when humans and canines first began a mutually beneficial relationship that eventually made our dogs our best friends. Solving the hows and whys of early canine domestication. For millions of years, humans and wild wolves shared the same hunting landscapes. While it's unknown exactly when domesticated dogs, Canis familiaris, evolved from the grey wolves, we do have some important scientific clues. A 2009 study published in the Molecular Biology and Evolution journal cites an analysis of ancient dog mitochondrial DNA that suggests they evolved alongside wolves over 100,000 years ago. Thus, many experts believe canines began scavenging due to a lack of food and that humans slowly developed a bond with these animals that also acted as an early warning if larger creatures approached a campsite or entered a cave. Some scientists believe wolves and early humans hunted together, and this is how the relationship was formed. The latest study by Dr. Boschin and his team focused on bone fragments from ancient canines and wolves found at two Paleolithic caves in southern Italy, the Paglici Cave and the Romanelli Cave. These ancient animals, according to the research, are the first dogs to live alongside humans as a pet. Furthermore, according to an article in the Daily Mail, the ancient canine-human connection offers a definitive answer to the long-standing question of how and when dogs first became pets. Anyone who has a dog or has experienced losing one knows the depth of uniqueness of that special bond. But why and when in the history of our planet did this love affair between humans and dogs begin? Discover the history of dogs and human interaction. The earliest known ancestors of grey wolves, a major figure in the history of dogs, are called creodonts. They roamed the northern hemisphere between 100 and 120 million years ago. By 55 million years ago, these pack-hunting carnivores gave rise to the carnassials, wolf-like animals that had jaws for tearing and devouring meat. One member of this family, known as Miakis, existed between 60 and 55 million years ago and is thought by mainstream scientists to be the common ancestor of all present-day wolves, dogs, bears, and raccoons. About 45 million years ago, up to around 2 million years ago, a massive species known as bear dogs roamed across North America, Europe, Africa and Asia, sharing hunting plains with Canis lupus, one of the closest relatives to the modern grey wolf. Around 25 million years ago, a species called Cynodictys split in two evolutionary branches, resulting in African hunting dogs and Eurasian wolves and dogs. At this time in North America, the clans were dominated by the fearsome Tomarctus, equipped with razor-sharp claws, a powerful biting jaw, and a long tail for balance while hunting and fighting. Up until 2010, most experts believe domestication occurred about 14,000 years ago, but studies of dog mitochondrial DNA strongly suggest they evolved alongside each other 100,000 years ago. Supporting this new paradigm, in 2009, several ritually buried dog skulls were discovered in a cave in the Czech Republic, which dated to 30,000 BC. Furthermore, in 2011, a Paleolithic dog skeleton dated to 30,000 BC was found biting a large mammoth bone, and its brain had been carefully removed sometime after death, suggesting it held ritual significance. Another dog skull dated to 31,000 BC was found buried with a human body in a cave in Siberia, not only telling archaeologists that the man had domesticated hunting dogs, but they had played an important role within his supernatural belief system. The relationship between humans and dogs was cemented at the dawn of farming, when people realized just how quickly a wolf could be domesticated with starch. Having sharp teeth, strong jaws, and speed, semi-tamed wolves were used to protect small hunting stations, and in return were rewarded with companionship, protection, shelter, and a reliable food source. By 6000 BC, dogs were being trained as effective farming tools and weapons used at times of intertribal fighting, and these inherent ancient skills are still evident today in different dog breeds, for example guard dogs, police dogs, military dogs, sheepdogs, and rat catchers. The rise of organized religions led to the ritualization of dogs, and they were generally associated with the human soul's journey in the afterlife. Canine deities were worshipped in ancient China, Egypt, and South America, where they were carved into statues and temples and featured centrally in mythologies and legends. Evidence of the ritualization of dogs was found in the skeleton of a male husky-like dog that lived 7,000 years ago in Siberia that had worked alongside humans throughout his lifetime, ate human food, and was ritually buried as though it were a human. What is more, a wild wolf was ritualistically buried nearby, perhaps once perceived as protecting human souls on their journey through the afterlife. Around 2000 BC, the Iron Age saw Romans, Egyptians, Greeks, and Britons increasingly using dogs in warfare, blood sports, and violent entertainment. Larger breeds such as the Mastiff and Wolfhound were found to be effective in war, and the ancient Roman history Strabo reported in 38 AD of large British dogs which were bred in their homeland of Britannia to hunt dangerous game as war dogs. In 43 AD, at the Roman conquest of Britain, a procurer called Syneggi was recorded as selecting dogs for exporting to Rome to either compete in the amphitheatre or to join the Roman army as war dogs. He mentioned a wide-mouthed giant dog that surpassed the Roman Molossus dog. What does the future have in store for dogs and us? Today, like in so many aspects of life, dogs have become extremely polarized, and we have specially trained medical dogs that detect cancers and smell when diabetic patients are suffering hypoglycemia, low blood sugars. This is all happening as astronaut dogs are being trained in space programs and search and rescue dogs leap from helicopters and speedboats, not to mention military dogs that can detect explosives and locate injured bodies in places deemed too dangerous for soldiers. A highlight in research for this article was learning that in 1943, during World War II, the American Army began a war dog training program which parachuted puppies into war zones to sniff out enemy tunnels and bunkers. What on earth will dogs be doing in the future? In the modern police and army, dogs that are trained to bite often suffer from broken teeth, which are now being replaced with sharp titanium fangs at a cost of between $600 and $2,000 a tooth. Is this the beginning of a new evolutionary path for canines? Like us, will we soon be able to sync our dogs with our computers and smartphones? In conclusion, the evolution of dogs that has spanned nearly 45 million years is far from complete, and although we have altered its course irreversibly with mass breeding over the last 200 years, so far no other animal has evolved to live alongside humans as harmoniously as dogs have.